The light from her phone cast a pale, flickering glow on her face. From my car parked across the street, I had a perfect view of my ex-wife, Sarah, sitting on the porch swing of the house she now shared with him. Her new man, Chad, a personal trainer with bleached tips and a tribal tattoo, was inside, probably admiring his reflection. But Sarah was motionless, her thumb frozen mid-scroll. I knew exactly what she was looking at. It was a picture of me, standing on the deck of a sailboat in the Adriatic Sea. The Croatian coastline a rugged, beautiful scar behind me. A grin was plastered on my face, the kind she hadn't seen in years. She thinks she's looking at a stranger's life, a fantasy curated by some influencer she just discovered. She has no idea she's looking at the new life of the boring husband she divorced. She's staring at a ghost, the ghost of the man I could have been all along, the man I finally became the moment she walked out the door. The irony is so thick it's almost suffocating. She left me because our life was a spreadsheet, a perfectly balanced but soul-crushing ledger of predictability. She wanted thrills, passion, and spontaneity. She wanted a life that would look good on social media. Now, she scrolls through my feed every night, watching me live the very life she craved, while she's stuck with a guy whose greatest adventure is finding a new protein powder. You're probably wondering how the dull, risk-averse accountant she left behind became the man she now stalks online with a look of quiet desperation. How did the man she called a human calculator end up living a life she can only dream of? To understand that, you have to go back to the day she delivered her verdict on our 10 years together, not realizing she was signing my Emancipation Proclamation, not my death warrant. It started not just with her, but with the family that always believed she was right. "Our life is beige, James," Sarah had said, standing in the middle of our beige living room, surrounded by beige furniture we'd picked out together. "It's a long, flat beige road to a beige retirement home. I can't do it. I need color. I need mountains and valleys, not this endless plain." She looked at me, her eyes filled not with hatred, but with a kind of pity that stung far worse. "You're a good man. You're stable. You're safe. Any woman would be lucky to have you. But I don't want to be lucky. I want to be alive." I didn't argue. What was there to say? She had passed judgment. My entire existence was a neatly organized binder, and she had just declared it unreadable. She packed a bag that night, saying she was going to a friend's. A week later, she served me with divorce papers. The first call I made, after the process server left, was to my mother. I expected sympathy, a comforting word, maybe even some anger on my behalf. Instead, I was met with a sigh. "Oh, James," my mother said, her voice laced with a familiar disappointment. "We all saw this coming. Sarah is a firecracker. You can't keep a firecracker in a shoebox. You were always so predictable." My own mother. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact, as if my predictability was a congenital defect. My father mumbled something in the background about how Chad seems like a real go-getter. They'd already met him. Then came the call from my brother, David. David, the golden child. While I was crunching numbers to get a scholarship, David was crunching abs and charming his way through life. He was a real estate agent who sold a lifestyle he couldn't afford, driving a leased BMW and wearing suits he bought on credit. "Listen, little bro," he said, his voice oozing condescending charm. "You gotta understand women. They want a leader, a wolf, not a sheepdog who just keeps the flock in line. You kept the finances perfect, sure, but you forgot to make her heart race." That was the moment the fog of grief began to lift, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had always seen me this way. James, the reliable utility. James, the scapegoat. I was the one who managed our parents' retirement portfolio for free, who helped David with the down payment on his first condo, a loan he conveniently forgot to repay. I was the sturdy, boring foundation upon which they all built their more exciting lives. Sarah wasn't just leaving me. She was simply the latest person to cash in my perceived value and walk away. They all thought they knew my story. They were about to find out they hadn't even read the first chapter. The clarity was liberating. For years, I had operated under the assumption that my role was to be the anchor, to provide stability while everyone else got to be the sails, catching the wind. Now I realized they didn't see me as an anchor. They saw me as a rock tied to their ankles, something they felt entitled to cut away the moment it became inconvenient. Fine. I would stop holding them steady and see how well they sailed in a storm. My first act of rebellion wasn't loud or dramatic. It was silent and methodical. I started with the house, the beige prison. I hired a consignment company and told them to sell everything. The sensible sofa, the matching dining set, the framed prints of tranquil landscapes we'd bought at a home goods store. I watched them haul it all away, piece by piece. Sarah had called our life beige. I was going to turn it into a blank white canvas. When she came by to pick up the last of her things, she stood in the cavernous, echoing living room, a bewildered look on her face. "What did you do?" she asked, as if I had desecrated a temple. "I'm liquidating assets," I said, my voice flat. "It's the most efficient way to divide the estate." She expected me to fight, to be sentimental. She was disappointed. During the divorce proceedings, her lawyer, a shark who probably smelled the blood of a nice guy, came in aggressive and demanding. I didn't have a lawyer. I had a laptop. I presented them with a single, comprehensive spreadsheet detailing every asset, every liability, every shared expense since the day we were married. It was color-coded, cross-referenced, and utterly irrefutable. Her lawyer's jaw slowly tightened as he realized there was no emotional leverage to exploit. I wasn't fighting for the house or the car. I was simply executing a financial dissolution. It was in creating that spreadsheet that I found the daggers she'd left in my back. Tucked away in our credit card statements were dozens of small, recurring charges I'd never noticed. A private gym membership, lunches at expensive restaurants, cash advances. It all fed into a separate bank account in her name only, her life fund. It had started 18 months ago. And then I saw it. A $5,000 transfer from our joint savings account to my brother David. The memo line read, "Loan, per discussion." We had never discussed it. She had been funding her escape and bankrolling my golden boy brother with our shared money. The betrayal wasn't just that she left. It was that she had been stealing from our future to fund her departure, with my family as willing accomplices. The house was empty, my marriage was over, and the check from the sale of our assets was in my hand. The books on my old life were officially closed. It was time to open a new ledger. I walked out of that empty house and never looked back. I sold it within a week, taking the first reasonable offer. I didn't care about maximizing the profit. I cared about severing the connection. With the proceeds from the house and our liquidated life, I had a significant amount of capital. My old self, the beige James, would have put it straight into a diversified portfolio of low-risk index funds and gone back to his accounting job. He would have played it safe. But the James was dead. I rented a small, furnished apartment downtown with a view of the city skyline instead of manicured lawns. The first thing I did wasn't to start a company, but to hire a person. A nutritionist and a personal trainer, a grizzled ex-military guy who couldn't care less about tribal tattoos. For a year, I subjected my body to the same rigorous discipline I had once applied to ledgers. The soft, sedentary accountant's physique melted away, replaced by lean muscle. I wasn't trying to become Chad, I was trying to become resilient. I learned to cook, not a necessity, but an act of creation. I took classes in Krav Maga not because I was looking for a fight, but because I wanted to learn how to stand my ground, physically and metaphorically. Then, I opened my new ledger. I started my own firm, a one-man forensic accounting and risk management consultancy. The very skills they had all mocked, my attention to detail, my obsession with numbers, my ability to see patterns in chaos, became my greatest assets. I didn't hunt for big corporate clients. I targeted small to medium-sized businesses, the kind that were vulnerable, the kind that couldn't afford a massive firm but were being bled dry by fraud, embezzlement, or bad partnerships. My first client was a woman who ran a local bakery, her grandfather's legacy. That was mysteriously failing. I spent 2 weeks buried in her books and found her partner had been siphoning profits for years through a fake wholesale vendor he'd created. I didn't just find the money. I built an ironclad case for law enforcement. Word spread. The numbers guy who finds the truth. My business grew exponentially. With my freedom, I started to travel, not to resorts, but to places that challenged me. I climbed mountains in Colorado, went scuba diving in Belize, and hiked the Inca Trail in Peru. I started an Instagram account, mostly as a personal travelogue. I never tagged my family. I never sent them a single photo. I had walled them off as completely as I had walled off Sarah. Then, about a year into my new life, my phone rang. It was my brother David. His voice had the same old fake bonhomie. "Jimmy boy, heard you're doing well. Big shot consultant now, eh? Listen, I've got this killer real estate opportunity, a guaranteed slam dunk, but I'm a little short on liquid capital." I let him finish his whole pathetic pitch. When he was done, I simply said, "David, my risk tolerance for unsecured personal loans has been permanently adjusted to 0. The silence on the other end of the line was more satisfying than any argument I could have won. The silence was beautiful. It was the sound of a door clicking shut on a room I never wanted to enter again. Of course, David didn't see it that way. He went crying to Mommy and Daddy, and my phone rang less than 10 minutes later. It was my mother, and the gentle, condescending disappointment was gone, replaced by a shrill, indignant rage. "James, what is wrong with you?" she shrieked, no preamble. "David is your brother. He comes to you for a little help, and you treat him like a stranger? After everything we've done for you, this is the thanks we get? You've become hard, cold. That money has poisoned you." I listened, letting her tirade wash over me. It was the same old song, just played in a different key. I was the selfish one for keeping what I had earned. They were the victims for not being able to take it. I was about to hang up when she delivered the line that would change everything. "We sacrificed so much for you," she yelled, her voice cracking. "David had that offer from that prestigious business school, you know. We could have sent him. But no, your father and I decided we had to pour everything into your safe future, your stable education, to make sure you were okay. We put you first, and you throw it back in our faces." The world tilted on its axis. It was the biggest, most audacious lie I had ever heard. The family myth, the one repeated at every holiday dinner, was that I was the one who had to be practical. I got a scholarship to the state university because we couldn't afford anything else. David, meanwhile, had been given seed money for 3 different failed startups, all under the guise of investing in his potential. They hadn't sacrificed for me. They had hobbled me. They had actively limited my options to ensure their golden child had no competition. They had created the boring, predictable James by design, and then resented me for being him. I didn't say a word. I simply hung up the phone. There was nothing left to say. The last, frayed thread of familial obligation had just been incinerated. I finally understood. I wasn't the scapegoat by accident. It was my assigned role from birth. In the months that followed, my success continued its steady upward climb. David's, I began to hear, was on a much different trajectory. His leased BMW was repossessed. A big commercial property deal he'd bragged about fell through, leaving him with massive debts. His house of cards, built on charm and other people's money, was collapsing. Meanwhile, I closed a deal that landed my firm a major contract, and to celebrate, I booked a 2-week sailing trip through the Greek islands. The pictures were spectacular. The day after I posted a photo of myself at the helm, the sun setting over Santorini, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. It was from Sarah. "Hi, James," it read. "You look happy. I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I looked at the text message on my phone, the screen glowing in the twilight of my hotel balcony in Oya. "You look happy." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. It was a complaint. How dare I be happy without her? How dare my life become colorful after she, the self-proclaimed source of all vibrancy, had departed? My first instinct was to delete it, to block the number and continue watching the sun dip into the Aegean. But that was the old James's move, avoidance. The new James understood strategy. An enemy reaching out is an opportunity. I let the message sit, unanswered, for 3 full days. I wanted her to stew in that silence, to wonder, to doubt. When I was back in the city, I finally replied, "I am. Coffee sometime?" I kept it simple, offering no warmth, just a proposition. She responded almost instantly, gushing with enthusiasm. I chose the place, a sleek, minimalist coffee shop on the ground floor of a new downtown skyscraper, a place buzzing with energy and ambition. A place that was everything our old suburban life was not. She arrived first, looking anxious. The 2 years had not been as kind to her as they had been to me. There were faint lines of stress around her eyes that her makeup couldn't hide. Her clothes were trying to be trendy but looked tired. I, on the other hand, walked in wearing a tailored blazer and a crisp shirt, fresh from a meeting. I was lean, sharp, and calm. The status reversal was palpable before we even said a word. She launched into a rehearsed monologue about how she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Chad, it turned out, was finding himself, which was a pathetic euphemism for being unemployed and playing video games on her couch. She talked about how shallow the thrill-seeking life was, how she missed our connection, our history. "I miss the quiet evenings, the stability," she said, her voice thick with fake sincerity. I realize now that the things I called boring were actually the things that mattered. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I was a fool, James. Can we find our way back?" I let her finish, sipping my black coffee. I set the cup down gently. "You don't miss me, Sarah," I said, my voice even and low. "You miss my perceived net worth. You miss the idea of me, the one you see on Instagram. The man you left wasn't boring. He was a resource you had finished exploiting." Her smile faltered. I leaned in slightly. "You weren't escaping a prison. You were executing an exit strategy. I saw the bank statements, the secret account you opened a 1.5 years before you left, the cash advances, and of course, the $5,000 transfer to David, a little severance package for my family, paid for by me." The color drained from her face. Her performance crumbled into dust, revealing the stunned, guilty woman beneath. This wasn't a script she had rehearsed. That wasn't, she stammered. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said, standing up. I placed a $20 bill on the table. It was good to see you, Sarah. It provided a valuable sense of closure. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her there, speechless, in the ruins of her own lie. Walking away from Sarah felt like closing the final page of a long, tedious book. There was no joy, no triumph, just the quiet relief of being finished. I underestimated, however, the fury of a narcissist scorned. Her calculated play for reconciliation had failed, her lies exposed. So, she did what people like her always do. She went on the offensive and played the victim on a grander scale. A week later, an old college friend sent me a link with the message, "Dude, is this about you?" The link led to a Reddit post on a popular relationship forum. The title was, "I, 34F, left my stable husband, 35 for a more exciting life, and made a huge mistake. Now he's successful and won't forgive me." I read the post, a masterpiece of manipulative fiction. In her telling, she was a young woman who felt stifled, who made a rash, emotional decision. She painted our marriage as passionless, but not bad, and me as a kind but uninspired man. She conveniently omitted the secret bank account, the premeditated deception, and the money she'd funneled to my brother. She detailed our recent coffee meeting, describing me as cold, cruel, and unforgiving, a man twisted into a monster by newfound wealth. She ended with a tearful plea to the internet. How could she make me see that she had changed? How could she earn back the trust of the man she now realized was her soulmate? The comments section was a tidal wave of sympathy for her and condemnation for me. He sounds like he has a massive ego now. Money changed him. Classic story. OP, you made a mistake, but he's being needlessly cruel. Everyone deserves grace. Hundreds of strangers were passing judgment on my life based on a beautifully crafted lie. My family, of course, fanned the flames. I heard through the grapevine that my mother was sharing the post with relatives saying, "See? This poor girl is heartbroken, and James is just heartless." They thought they were shaming me into submission. They thought public pressure would make me crack and come crawling back into my assigned role as the family ATM. They had no idea they were giving me exactly what I needed, a public stage for the final act. They had created a narrative. I was about to provide the ending. My first thought was to reply, to post the bank statements and expose her. But that was a battle of words, messy and undignified. I was planning a battle of consequences. The final catalyst came from an alert on my work computer. As a final insult, my parents had never removed me as a financial advisor on their retirement accounts. They probably forgot. I received a notification for a requested wire transfer of $75,000 from their main portfolio. The recipient? David's Downtown Development, LLC. I froze. I knew David had no such company. A quick search confirmed it was a shell corporation he'd registered 2 weeks prior. He wasn't just in debt. He was trying to drain our parents' life savings to cover his losses. He was going to leave them with nothing. My mother's words echoed in my head. "We sacrificed so much for you." The hypocrisy was staggering. They had enabled the wolf, and now he was at their door. I picked up my phone, but I didn't call them. I called the best financial fraud attorney in the state. "I need to hire you," I said. "And I need you to recommend a private investigator. It's regarding a pattern of fraud and elder exploitation in my family." The machine I set in motion was terrifyingly efficient. The private investigator, a man named Miller who looked more like a librarian than a bulldog, moved with a quiet precision that I, as an accountant, deeply respected. He didn't find a skeleton in David's closet. He found a whole graveyard. My brother wasn't just a failing real estate agent, he was a small-time con artist. He had a string of defaulted loans from private lenders, a history of taking deposits for investment seminars that never happened, and 2 pending lawsuits from disgruntled former partners. The David's Downtown Development LLC was a textbook maneuver to hide assets and defraud creditors. He was a parasite, and my parents were his chosen host. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, reviewed Miller's report with a grim satisfaction. "The wire transfer request is a gift," she said, her voice crisp. "It's clear-cut attempted elder financial abuse. We can stop it, report him, and it's over." "No," I said, my voice firm. "That's not enough. Stopping it just puts a bandage on the problem. They'll call me cruel and controlling. They'll never understand." "I want them to see him for what he is." Albright raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "We let the transfer go through," I explained. "But first, you restructure my parents' entire estate into an irrevocable trust. I'll be the trustee. They won't have the authority to move a single dime anymore, but they won't know that yet. Let David take the money. Let him think he won. He'll be taking it from an account that is now legally under my protection. And every dollar he spends will be another nail in his coffin." Albright's grim satisfaction turned into a slow, appreciative smile. She understood. This wasn't just about stopping a crime. It was about exposing a truth so completely that no one could deny it. While the legal trap was being set, Miller's report also landed a file on my desk about Sarah. As expected, her life with Chad was a financial disaster. They were months behind on rent for their overpriced townhouse. Chad had a fledgling online fitness brand funded by high-interest credit cards Sarah had foolishly co-signed. Her name was now attached to nearly $30,000 of his debt. Her Reddit post wasn't a plea for love. It was a desperate Hail Mary to find a new life raft before hers sank completely. The day the trust was finalized and legally shielded, I authorized the bank to release the $75,000 transfer to David's shell company. My phone immediately lit up with a triumphant text from him. "About time, bro. Knew you'd see reason." A few minutes later, a message from my mother. "Thank you for doing the right thing, James. We're so proud of the man David is becoming." The delusion was breathtaking. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now for the final act. I booked a private dining room at a notoriously expensive restaurant, the kind of place my family only dreamed of entering. I sent out 4 identical, formally worded emails, one to my parents, one to David, and one to Sarah. The subject line was simple: a family meeting. The message was even simpler: "I have a proposition to discuss regarding the family's financial future. Please join me for dinner this Friday at 7 p.m. It is in everyone's best interest that you attend." They would see it as a white flag. They would think the cold, hard James had finally broken, that their campaign of shame had worked. They would walk into that dinner expecting a check. They had no idea they were walking into a reckoning. Friday night arrived. I was seated at a large circular table in the restaurant's most exclusive private room, the founder's cellar, surrounded by walls of vintage wine. The lighting was low, the air thick with the scent of old money and quiet power. I was calm. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times. I was not here to argue. I was here to present my findings. They arrived together, a united front of vipers. David was practically vibrating with smug energy, already spending his next handout in his head. My mother and father wore expressions of strained magnanimity, ready to lecture me on family values before graciously accepting my surrender. And Sarah trailed behind them, her eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic hope. She thought I'd had a change of heart about her. They took their seats, the silence punctuated only by the clinking of water glasses. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice resonating evenly in the quiet room. I felt it was time we cleared the air. There have been some narratives floating around on the internet and within the family that I'd like to address. I picked up the first slim folder and slid it across the polished mahogany to Sarah. "Sarah, let's start with you. I read your story on Reddit. It was very moving, but it felt like a first draft. I took the liberty of adding some source material for you." She opened it. Inside was a printed copy of her post. Behind it were the bank statements for her secret account, a copy of the check for the $5,000 she gave David, and Miller's report on her and Chad's catastrophic debt. Her face went from pale to ashen. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. I turned to my parents, sliding a second folder toward them. "Mother, Father, you've spoken at length about your sacrifices for me." I placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed play. My mother's shrill voice filled the room. "David had that offer from that prestigious business school, you know. We could have sent him. But no, we had to pour everything into your safe future." I pressed stop. My father stared at his plate. My mother looked like she had been struck. "And as for the future," I continued, "this folder contains the legal documents for the new irrevocable trust that now controls your entire estate. As the trustee, I'll ensure you have a comfortable allowance for the rest of your lives. Your days of funding a con artist, however, are over." Finally, I turned to David. His smugness had evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. I pushed the last, thickest folder toward him. "David, your $75,000. It's all in here." He frantically flipped through the pages. Miller's entire investigation, the evidence of his shell company, his history of fraud. As he stared at the proof of his pathetic crimes, the door to the room opened. 2 men in suits walked in. One was Miller. The other introduced himself as a detective with the Financial Crimes Division. "David Richards," the detective said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud and financial elder exploitation." Chaos erupted. My mother shrieked. My father sputtered, speechless. David looked at me, his face a mask of disbelief and pure hatred. "You did this," he hissed as they cuffed him. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. I looked at the wreckage of my family, the sobbing, the shouting, the silent, catatonic shock of Sarah. "You all called me a boring, predictable accountant," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You were right. I just account for everything, and tonight the books are finally balanced." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to their well-earned ruin.